We have some big news to go over today. As NHL insider Elliotte Friedman has dropped a massive report surrounding the Leafs and one particular player that reveals some big information surrounding Brad Treliving's plans going forward. We're going to break down that exact report from Friedman and discuss what it means. We also have a bunch of interesting Leafs updates to go over today, including some free agency stuff, some trade stuff, and one interesting note surrounding their trade of Maccelli. So stay tuned for all that on this episode. But before we get into it all, folks, if you're a part of the percentage you aren't subscribed to the channel, this is the place to be for daily Leafs content. Your guys' support has been unbelievable as we're on the road to 25,000 subscribers and the big goal of 30,000. You guys are an absolute beast. Darius, some interesting information today. Elliotte Friedman came out with a bit of a news dump here, and we have some big stuff to go over, specifically surrounding one player that we haven't covered yet on the channel, and that is, of course, maybe not of course, we haven't really talked about him. It is Jack Roslovic, and not Nazem Kadri, because of course, the Leafs have been linked to Nazem Kadri. We're going to be focusing on Jack Roslovic today. You can see this here. Elliotte Friedman thinks it was time for the Leafs forever and Mitch Marner to move on. And of course, he also said, and we'll touch on Marner a little bit, but that's kind of past now. But he also said, was keep a note here, that he said a Toronto player told him it was a huge distraction and that Shane Doan led the way in wanting to add Maccelli. But he's also heard Toronto was in on Jack Roslovic, who had played with Matthews before. So some interesting Marner insight there if you're curious. And of course, interesting as well for Shane Doan leading the way on Maccelli. We'll dive into that in a little bit, but let's focus on Jack Roslovic now. We know the Leafs have been involved in a lot of trade rumors. Like I mentioned, Nazem Kadri has been in the thick of it. And of course, now Jack Roslovic is a name that the Leafs are, I'm going to assume, pursuing pretty heavily here. If Elliotte Friedman reported this, there is a very interesting name. And honestly, the more I think about it, the more it makes a lot of sense. Is he a top six player? That's the big question mark. But according to Friedman, he's obviously a right-handed shot, but Matthews knows him, and I would assume is making a push to get his, what seemingly is some sort of relationship there between Matthews and Jack Roslovic.
Well, the last couple of days, we've been talking about a couple of guys that could come in and play top 6 minutes for the Toronto Maple Leafs and that they need to acquire via trade a top 6 player before the season starts. And that's the plan. And I also think it's pretty interesting that they came out and announced that that's the plan, because then I think it makes it a little bit harder to make a trade in that way. But we can discuss that at another later date. But and obviously we're going to have, videos on Maccelli and some other players that they brought in at some point. But, another player that they could add is Jack Roslovic. He knows Austin Matthews. He's a right shot. He's a good player in this league. The thing for me is I don't think he's a top 6 player per se. I think he's a player that could play in a top 6 in the league, like on some teams. But I don't know if he can come in and be that guy that's going to put up like 80 points on the wing of Austin Matthews. I mean, maybe, right? Because Austin Matthews is that goal scorer. And if he returns to form after, battling an injury last year, then obviously Jack Roslovic, if he's playing beside him, is going to put up a lot of points by default, right? But I just don't know if he's that guy. That being said, I think he'd be a great player, and I think you could add him on the wing. But we're going to get into some projected salary stuff in a second. I don't know if it makes sense, because if you're going to go get him, he's not going to play top line minutes. You still have to go out and get a top line player, which is still going to cost you a lot. And of course, the Leafs are going to have more salary cap space than they have right now. If you go look at Puck Peter or whatever, they're going to have more. They're going to make some moves. But I still think that is a big question mark with Roslovic. It's a decent option. I think he can come in and put up points. I just don't know how many points he's going to put up. I don't know how much he's going to add to your lineup other than that. And I feel like there's some other targets out there. And I should mention, by the way, other targets out there that are better via trade. This would be free agent. He's a free agent right now. You would be able to sign him. You wouldn't have to trade anything. I just don't know if he's the answer on that line. There's other players we've been talking about via trade that I think could be the answer. I don't know if he's the answer, even though you wouldn't have to give up assets.
Yeah, you could do both. I guess that might be their plan, but his projected cap hit is $4.2 million, which is pretty expensive. You see his stats up there, but we'll dive into it in the full screen for you. You can see here 22 goals, 17 assists, and he's only 28 years old. So I think this is someone that, again, yeah, he is pricey for what he provides. Like, I'm sure there's people out there, maybe you included, Darius, like that would prefer they take a shot once again this year with Nick Robertson as opposed to paying $5 million to Jack Roslovic. However, Roslovic has had some really good years. I mean, he used to play back in Winnipeg before the Line trade. He requested, I believe, out of Winnipeg as well, which is an interesting thing. But after all that, he had time with, you mentioned it, Hurricanes now, the Blue Jackets before, the Winnipeg Jets before. 39 points, 81 games, a very good bottom 6 guy and someone that could actually contribute pretty well. However, do you want to be paying that amount of money? Now, if you get rid of Cal Yarncroke, if you get rid of, obviously, David Kampf, you open up some salary, they do that. It could make some sense here. And we have a speculative rumor / report. He said that considering mainly offers from Canadian teams could sign soon. This guy, I mean, it's hit or miss. We're just going to throw it out there, take it with a massive grain of salt. But it is interesting. You can see this here from Leafs latest. They have expressed interest in forward Jack Roslovic. one of the reasons they didn't land Andrew Mangiapane was the need to move bodies out, and Mangiapane wasn't willing to wait, which is very interesting news. Roslovic, however, is still available, and it's noted that one of the players Toronto may be trying to move is Kampf and Calle Jarnkrok. There's also been talk that the Leafs could be exploring a move involving a defenseman for a forward, and that was, of course, because they were interested apparently in JJ Peterka. We'll have videos on that, of course, as it comes out, but it seems that Mangiapane didn't want to wait. There were some rumors he didn't want to, come to Canada because of the spotlight. It seems now he just didn't want to wait for the Leafs to move on. Roslovic is still available. I think this is a very real possibility, and I actually like it. The problem is you still need to get a top 6, and I guess it depends on the cap hit. I don't know if he's going to command that $4 or $5 million now if he's waited this long and he hasn't received an offer.
Well, you brought up a good point a couple of minutes ago about Nick Robertson. Nick Robertson has put up numbers similar to what Roslovic did last year, and Roslovic played almost the entire season. So do you want to dish out $4 million, which if you look at the projection, it's going to be something like that. It's not going to be exactly, but Scotia Stat Projections has been almost bang on every single one since July 1st. So shout out to them. But I think that, and obviously not bang on with the Florida Panthers because I have no idea how they retained all 3 of those guys, but that's a different story. But obviously, if you're looking at Roslovic, maybe he's a 3rd-line player on this team, maybe a 2nd-line player, but you just, traded for Maccelli, who I assume is going to be playing on either the 2nd or the 1st line. So I think that's pretty interesting there. But I don't know. He's a player that could help this lineup, but you have limited cap space left if you're moving out Calle Jarnkrok and obviously David Kampf, and you want to use that on a top 6 player, like via trade, right? You want to bring in money because obviously you're going to have to bring in money if you want a player who's going to play in that spot and be productive and be an effective player. So pretty interesting move. I think if they were to go after Roslovic, he's a guy that clearly is waiting and fielding his options right now. There's been rumors that maybe he doesn't want to return to Canada. Like you said, he didn't want to play in Winnipeg, but that's a different story. Toronto's a different story. So could be an interesting move. I just don't know if it makes sense for this team, the way that, it's currently made up right now. If you look at Puckpedia, of course, the lines are not set at all. They're still going to make some moves. Just doesn't make too much sense to me considering age, how many points he's put up. And you compared him, not 1 for 1 to Nick Robertson, but a guy like Nick Robertson making far less can put up points like this playing far less, right? Far less games. And obviously, I don't even think they're going to retain Nick Robertson at this point. So could be an interesting option if he's willing to take far less than he's projected to. I just don't know if that's the case because a lot of these guys, when you look at the projections, they sign for close to that. So I think we'll leave it at that. I don't know if he's going to be, a Toronto Maple Leaf, but I think they've expressed interest. And I do think that the Leafs, they have analytics and advanced stats that we don't have access to. And sometimes they see players that bring more to the lineup than we can see. So maybe they see something there that if they pair them with, Austin Matthews, he will be a top line producer. I just don't see it from the outside looking in.
Yeah, let's know what your thoughts are. I think I like him a little more than you probably do. It all depends on the money. And again, the Nick Robertson comparison is interesting. Jack Roslovic is a better NHLer at this point than Nick Robertson. I think that's what Brad Treliving is focused on, is improving that lackluster bottom 6 that they had last year, specifically regarding the goal scoring department. But that'll wrap up that. One quick note as well, just to kind of throw in here, I'll have another video on it. If you were interested, there were 4 other teams interested in Maccelli before the Leafs were able to acquire him. Boston, Edmonton was among them. So clearly the Leafs were high on him, and it's interesting to see that even though there were 3 or 4, we assume 4 other teams, they were able to get him for what seems like a very reasonable price. So it's good work by Brad Treliving, good work by Shane Doan, and that'll wrap it up. Let us know down below what your thoughts are.